I spent over $2,000 on ergonomic keyboards, and in this video, I'm going to be taking you through my progression of ergonomic keyboards, going over the different levels of ergo keyboards that I see out there, and giving my feedback on what I like and what I don't like about all of them, and at the end, telling you which one is my daily driver and why I decided to choose that as my daily driver. So for some of you that are new to the whole ergo keyboard, which is by the way ergonomic keyboard for those that don't really know, but essentially the whole premise of ergo keyboards is the fact that the existing QWERTY keyboard layout that we have on our laptops is not the most ergonomic for a couple of reasons. Typically speaking, the way that people make the existing QWERTY keyboard to be more ergonomic is by a couple of different factors. Number one is by making the keyboard split out into two separate halves, because on the typical QWERTY keyboard, our shoulders are a little cramped in, our arms are a little tucked in this way, and our arms are not at our natural position. Naturally, our arms are like to be at shoulder width apart. So what a lot of these ergo keyboards end up doing is splitting the keyboards into two separate halves so that you can stay at a typical, more natural shoulder width length. So that's probably one of the most defining characteristics of an ergonomic keyboard, is the fact that it is split. And the split keyboard is a key defining characteristic in every single ergonomic keyboard that I have bought, and I'm going to show you today. And I'm going to be talking about these keyboards from the lowest learning curve, like the most similar to the typical traditional QWERTY keyboard, and then I'm going to be progressing in order to the most different type of keyboard from the typical keyboard that you use on your laptop or your computer. And as we start talking about some of the crazier keyboards that are out there, I'll show you some other ergonomic features that they have as well. So the first keyboard that I want to talk about is this brand new Kinesis Form keyboard. So this is an ergonomic keyboard that is split into two separate halves, and what's interesting about this keyboard in particular is the fact that it has this trackpad in the center. This is actually like a Windows precision touchpad, which is great for all the Windows users out there, but I daily drive a Mac computer, and unfortunately the trackpad is just not as good as the existing Apple factory OEM Magic trackpad. But that's not because Kinesis doesn't know how to make a good trackpad, that's more so because Apple does place some hardware limitations on what third-party accessories, third-party trackpads have access to, and that's how they ensure that their OEM Magic trackpads form the best. So when you look at this keyboard, you can see that it is split into two separate halves, and the whole logic behind this is the fact that now, let's angle this keyboard a little bit more down, is the fact that my arms are at a more natural shoulder length apart, and I can just type a little bit more naturally this way without having a traditional keyboard where my arms are a little bit more cramped inwards to try to get the center key. Because it is split into two separate halves, much more natural shoulder width length, shoulder width apart to type naturally. And now in terms of this keyboard, it is a pretty low learning curve. Sure, there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve still in case you don't type with like the correct form, the correct way. But for the most part, the learning curve is pretty low because the layout is very similar to the existing QWERTY keyboards. It's just separated into two separate halves. And there are a lot of other keyboards that are very similar to the Kinesis Form of having a one solid piece keyboard split into two separate halves. One of the most popular ones is called the Microsoft Sculpt keyboard. And then there's also the Alice keyboard layout that is also similar in that it's just a split keyboard in a typical keyboard. So I think this is level one of ergonomic keyboards, and I do think it is more ergonomic. I think any split keyboard is more ergonomic than a non-split keyboard, just because your arms can be at shoulder width apart, which is a little bit more natural for the human body. Now the second level of ergonomic keyboards is actual split keyboards like this one right here. This is the Kinesis Freestyle Edge. And the big difference between this keyboard and the Kinesis Form, like I showed you previously, is the fact that, well, it's a normal split keyboard that's legitimately split in half, so you can have it as wide apart as you want or as close together as you want. This keyboard has a little bit more of a learning curve compared to the Kinesis Form, just because it's actually physically split apart. And what's really interesting is the fact that you can see that the spacebar is also split in half as well. So then you can hit the spacebar on your left hand or your right hand, whichever one you prefer. But as you can see with this keyboard, aside from the fact that it's physically split apart, there's nothing too different with it. There's no crazy different layout. And the other thing that makes these keyboards more ergonomic is the fact that they have these wrist rests built into the keyboard as well. And this is really useful because then when you're typing, your wrists have somewhere to lie on while you're typing to get a little bit more support. Because you use a keyboard that doesn't have a wrist rest like this keyboard right here, and move this all the way, you can see that sometimes your wrist can be put at an awkward angle when it's making contact with the ground, the table, and then trying to type on the keyboard as well. It's not the most comfortable. It puts your wrist in an awkward position. So that's why the built-in wrist rests are really nice, because it just lets your wrist sit right there and your hand gets to just kind of spread out at a much more natural position. Aside from the wrist rest, the Kinesis Freestyle and these general split ergo keyboards, so the layout is very similar to your normal traditional QWERTY keyboards. So this is the second level of ergonomic keyboards that you can then upgrade to. The third level of ergonomic keyboards that you can level up to is this type of layout right here. Now we're starting to get into some pretty crazy layouts. This is called the Ergonomic Easy, as you can see right here. This is actually my first ergonomic keyboard. And immediately you can start seeing some huge differences with your traditional keyboard. The biggest one being this little thumb cluster, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in addition to the thumb cluster, we'll also see that once again, this is a pure split keyboard. And another thing that you can see is that the keys are actually laid out in a way such that they are all perfectly aligned with one another. So your fingers have to go up and down immediately. Whereas if you look at a QWERTY keyboard, you can see that everything is kind of offset at an angle, not really quite vertically aligned. And there are some arguments to be made that this is just more ergonomic because your fingers have to travel less lateral distance and can just focus on going immediately above, immediately below, immediately above, immediately below. Now, sure, there might be some ergonomic gains to be had from that, but I think the ergonomic gain to that is on the lower end of the spectrum compared to these thumb clusters right here. Now, what makes the thumb cluster so unique and more ergonomic compared to your traditional QWERTY keyboard, in my opinion, and what's odd about that is the fact that our pinkies, which are doing so much work, they're actually the weakest finger on our hands. I mean, just look at them size-wise, they're really small. Whereas on the flip side, our thumbs, these bad boys right here, these are the strongest fingers in our hands, probably the most muscular, most important part, or else we'll just be a bunch of primates out here. But the thumb, arguably the strongest finger on the hand, on a typical keyboard, it's only hitting the spacebar, and that's it. So the whole theory behind these thumb clusters right here is that it moves keys like tab, caps lock, spacebar, backspace, command, alt, control. It moves it all into the thumb clusters right here, so your pinkies don't have to do any more work. It takes the load off of your pinkies and moves all of that stress onto your thumbs instead because they're the stronger finger out there. I got the Ergonomic Easy keyboard and I loved it. I really, really do. And as you can see, it also comes with some wrist rests as well that you put directly underneath here. It's a nice snug little fit, but they're not connected, so they are a separate thing that you have to carry around with you. Now, the next level of ergo keyboard that I bought is this one right here. It's gonna be the Moonlander. So this is the Moonlander, and it's actually built by the same company that I bought the Ergonomic Easy from. This was like a newer product that they came out with. And for the most part, very similar characteristics to the existing Ergonomic Easy. You have your thumb cluster, you have your keyboard right here that's vertically aligned. I always forget the exact term for that. I think it might be ortholinear. Could be wrong, don't quote me on that. But you can see keyboards are perfectly vertically aligned with another, and they can also tent up with these feet as well, so that you can tent your keyboard at an angle, which keeps your hands at a more natural like handshake position like this, rather than pronating it, turning it all the way over this way and potentially causing some stress on your forearms. So the biggest improvement that this keyboard has over the Ergonomic Easy is these built-in wrist rests right here. So then with these built-in wrist rests, you can see that it just provides your wrist with a place to have a little bit more support so that your wrists don't have to strain to be at a weird angle to type like this. Instead, it can just rest a lot more comfortably this way. I love the Ergonomic Easy keyboard. I love these Moonlander keyboard as well, specifically by the company that I bought them from. I believe the website's like ergonomiceasy.com or .io. I'll include a more up-to-date link somewhere in this video right here. And what I love in particular about these keyboards is the fact that it is so dead simple to remap your keys. You can have so many different profiles. I think you can assign like 10, 20 different profiles to this keyboard if you have that many different workflows. And I think the way that they constructed the software to reassign the keys is so simple. And they have a lot of software like a training ground for you to learn how to use your keyboard more and get used to the different layout. And they have a lot of tools in place to make that transition process from a typical QWERTY keyboard into one of their more intense ergonomic keyboards like this offering a lot simpler. And I got to give so much shout outs to the software team behind that to make the key remapping software so dead simple, because the next keyboard that I want to talk about, while I do think it is physically the most ergonomic and the most comfortable keyboard, the software experience is horrible, like really bad, super boomer. Let me show you the keyboard. So the next and final keyboard that I want to talk about is my daily driver keyboard, the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro. Whoa, crazy as hell looking keyboard right here. Now, let's dive deeper a little bit into what makes this keyboard so special. So as you can see, it has some hallmark characteristics of a good ergo keyboard. It is split, has a great thumb cluster, has, I think, the ortholinear keys where it's perfectly vertically aligned. And the one physical feature I think that makes this keyboard more ergonomic than the Moonlander or the Ergonomic Easy that I showed you before is the fact that you can see the keys are concave. it slopes inwards. And I thought it was like all like marketing foo-foo, like, oh, it can't be that great. But something about that concave nature just really caresses my fingers really well. I think it just helps me, it allows me to hit the keys with a lot less travel compared to the Moonlander and the Ergodox Easy. I just personally think the shape of it really just matches the gentle slope of my fingers, and I just find it way more ergonomic than the Ergodox Easy or the Moonlander, whose keys were just like horizontal, like flat, no concave nature to it. Now, while I do love this keyboard so much, the biggest con against the Kinesis keyboards is the software experience to remap all of the key bindings, the keystrokes. It is horrible compared to the Moonlander and the Ergodox. I'll include some screenshots of what the software looks like, but it straight up looks like software that was built in the 90s and it was never ever updated. And I'll say this one as well. So this is actually the non-pro version. And also with this Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro, don't get me wrong, I find it the most ergonomic keyboard out there. And there are actually two versions of this keyboard. I actually have the non-pro version, which means it is not Bluetooth, it is completely wired. I had to plug it in to use it. And they do have an Advantage 360 Pro version, which is fully Bluetooth compatible, no wires in sight. And I actually used to have that as my daily driver keyboard. But I actually find the wired version of the keyboard to be much better, because the Bluetooth version of the keyboard, its Bluetooth connection was honestly pretty spotty. Every now and then the two halves would just completely disconnect from each other, and it would also randomly disconnect from my laptop as well. And this is going to be such a deep edge case that most likely no one else is going to run into. But actually the one environment that I actually found the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro to consistently disconnect from my laptop's Bluetooth and not work at all was when I fired up my walking treadmill. I have a walking treadmill underneath this desk that has like a Bluetooth remote. For some reason, whenever that treadmill was on, my Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro just completely stopped connecting to my laptop. It was weird. But even outside of that really weird instance where I'm using my walking treadmill, it would still maybe once every week, once every 2 to 3 weeks, it would still disconnect from my laptop, and it was still pretty annoying to reconnect it all. I mean, really all I had to do was restart the Bluetooth on my computer, which is not that annoying, but the fact that I paid $470 or something for that keyboard and the Bluetooth wasn't working flawlessly, like, hey, at that price point, it shouldn't have any issues. But with the Kinesis Advantage 360, the wired version, non-pro version, I don't have to worry about that. The connection is always stable, and thumbs up on that. I think it's a way better user experience. But like I mentioned, the biggest con, the biggest downside to using the Kinesis Advantage 360, whether it be the regular or the pro version, is the software experience to remap your keys if you want to do some key customization. It's just such old software and it's so clunky to use, especially if you compare it to the software to use to update your Moonlander or your Ergodox Easy. But most of the time, you're not going to be updating your key bindings, your key mapping that often, so you just have to endure the pain like once or twice to get desired key binding, or you can just use it completely stock as well, which is what I've done for the most part. And once you're done interacting with the software and you have your keyboard mapped out to how you want, it is a dream to type on. This is by far the most ergonomic keyboard that I personally have ever used. So that is 5 different levels of ergonomic keyboards, over $2,000 spent purchasing all of these keyboards. And I hope you found something a little bit interesting, and maybe you want to try out your own Ergo keyboard as well. Let me know if you have any comments or questions about the keyboards. Leave them in the comment below. More than happy to answer as many as I can. But that's about it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.